Day 10, multiplying, dividing sign numbers, squares, and square roots. So when we're multiplying or dividing sign numbers, we want to keep in mind that if our signs are the same, our answer is going to be positive. If our signs are different, then our answer is going to be negative. You need to also think that multiplication can be represented in different ways. Same thing as division. Multiplication can be written with your multiplication sign, so that X. It can be written with the dot, the multiplication dot, or it can be written with parentheses. When it's written with parentheses, you have to make sure that you pay attention to your signs. If there's a negative out in front of the parentheses, it means -1 times whatever's inside the parentheses. So you have to simplify what's inside those parentheses first before you add on that -1 to whatever your answer is. So if we look at some examples that are not done for us, for 11, it says represent each situation as the product of signed numbers. A says a stock drops 3/4 point every day for 4 days. So that's a -3/4 times 4. B says a salesperson earns $58 a day for 6 days. If he earns $58, that's a positive 58, and then it's times 6 because it's 6 days. For C, it says a skydiver descends 2.5 meters per second for 45 seconds. Descends means goes down, so that's a -2.5 times 45. For D, it says how much heavier a sack of rice was 8 days ago if half a pound has been used each day. So that half a pound used is a -1/2, and then 8 days ago is just 8. For 12, we're finding each product. So A is -9 times 8, which is -72. B, we have 10 times -2/5. So a negative times a positive is going to be a negative. The 5 becomes a 1, 2. The 10 becomes a 2. So it's 2 times -2, which is -4. For C, we have -12.7 times -1.4. A negative times a negative is a positive, so we're just going to do the 12.7 times 1.4, which is going to give us a positive 17.78. For D, we have -51 times 36. For this, because you have a negative and a positive, your answer is going to be negative, and 51 times 36 is 1,836. For A, we have -6 times -5 times -9. We're looking at number 13. A negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative gives us a negative. So the 6 times 5 is 30, times -9 is -270. For B, we have 3 times -11 times -10. The negative times the negative is going to give us a positive, so we could also do 3 times 10, which is 30, times -11, positive, because everything's going to be positive. 30 times 11 gives us 330. For C, we have -7 times 8 times -14. So we have a negative times a positive times a negative, which is going to give us a positive. So 7 times 8 is 56. If we multiply that by the 14, that gives us a 784. For D, we have 15 times 16 times -3. A positive times a positive is a positive, times a negative gives us a negative. So the 15 times 3 is 45. If we multiply that by 16, we get -720. For 14, we're replacing each bracket with a number to make the true statement. For A, we have -4 times something is equal to -28. A negative times a positive is a negative, so our answer is going to be a positive. And 4 times 7 is 28, so that's just +7. For B, we have 6 times something is equal to -48. A positive times a negative is a negative. 6 times 8 is 48, so -8 is our missing number. For C, we have -9 times something is equal to 3. In order for us to go from a larger number to a smaller number, that number that we're missing, it has to be a fraction. A negative times a negative is a positive, so our answer is going to be negative. And 9 divided by 3 is 3, so that's 1/3. -1/3. For D, we have something times negative 7 times negative 10 is equal to 35. Well, 7 times 10 is 70. So something times 70 is equal to 35. Oops. In order to give ourselves a positive, our answer is going to be positive, and it's just going to be 1/2. For A through D in number 15, we're finding each product. So for A, we have negative 2 to the 5th power. Because that negative is on the inside of the parentheses, our answer is going to be positive. Or sorry, it's going to make sure, it's not the fact that it's going to be positive, but we're going to be looking at the exponent to see if it's positive or negative. That exponent is odd, so our answer is going to be negative. And we're going to do 2 times itself 5 times. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. So that's a negative 32. For B, we have negative 3 to the 4th power. The negative is on the inside of the parentheses, so look at the exponent to tell if your answer is positive or negative. The exponent is a even number, so our answer is going to be positive. 3 times 3 is 9. Times 3 is 27, times 3 is 81. So it's a positive 81. For C, we have negative 1 to the 10th power. The negative is on the inside of the parentheses. The exponent is even, so we're going to have a positive number for our answer, and negative 1 to the 10th power is just positive 1. For D, we have negative 5 squared. Negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. You're working with the same rules when you're doing division as well. So if your signs are the same, your answer is going to be positive. If they're different, they're going to be negative. Your division is represented either using your division sign, the division house, or a fraction. So if we look at some of these examples, for 11a, we have negative 90 divided by 10. A negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 90 divided by 10 is negative 9. B is 144 divided by negative 12. Again, a positive divided by a negative is a negative. 12 goes into 144 12 times, so that's negative 12. For C, we have negative 120 divided by negative 30. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then to keep on, sorry, we did that because I got rid of those zeros because each number had a 0. For D, we have 78 divided by negative 13. A positive divided by a negative is a negative, and then 13 goes into 78 6 times, so that's negative 6. For 12, we are dividing these. So for A, we have 7.25 divided by negative 5. A negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 5 goes into 7.25. 1.45 times, so it's negative 1.45. For B, we have negative 0.169 divided by negative 13. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. 13 goes into 169 13 times, but we do have decimals there, so this is going to be a positive 0.013. For C, we have negative 72.3 divided by 5. So a negative divided by a positive is a negative, and then 5 goes into 72.3 14.46 times. For D, we have 0 divided by negative 5.8. When we are doing this, 0 divided by anything is 0, and 0 is neither positive nor negative, so it's just 0. For 13, we have negative 2 and 5/8 divided by negative 3. So I'm going to rewrite this up here. Negative 2 and 5/8 divided by negative 3. And this was 13a. Okay. So I'm going to turn this negative 2 and 5/8 into an improper fraction. I know that my negative divided by a negative is going to give me a positive, so I'm not going to worry about my signs. But 2 times 6 is 16, 2 times 8 is 16, plus 5 is 21 over 8. I'm going to divide this by 3 over 1. I'm going to keep, change, flip, so 21 over 8 times 1 over 3. The 21 becomes a 7, the 3 becomes a 1. So we just have 7/8. Oops. For 13b, we have 3/5 divided by -1 and 1/2. 3/5 divided by -1 and 1/2. All right. So 3/5 is going to stay. The -1 and 1/2 is going to become -3 over 2. If we keep change flip, this is going to be 3 over 5 times -2 over 3. That negative always stays up top with your fraction. So cross simplify from here, those 3's cancel out. So we're just going to have -2/5. For 13c, we are given -6 and 1/4 divided by -1/2. -6 and 1/4 divided by -1/2. All right, so we're going to change this into an improper fraction. With the 6 and 1/4, our negative divided by negative is a positive. So 6 times 4 is 24, plus 1 is 25. Keep it over the 4, divided by 1/2. Keep change flip, so 25 over 4 times 2 over 1. Simplify, the 2 becomes a 1, the 4 becomes a 2. 25 over 2 is the same thing as 12 and 1/2. For 13d, we are given -4/5 divided by 3/10. -4/5 divided by 3/10. So keep change flip, -4/5 times 10 over 3. The 5 becomes a 1, 10 becomes a 2. -4 times 2 is -8. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 goes into -8 twice. Keep the negative with 2 left over, so that's -2 and 2/3. For 14, it says to replace each bracket by a number to make a true statement. So for A, we have something divided by -8 is equal to -10. That's going to have to be 80, a positive 80. For B, we're given -15 divided by something is equal to 23. So if we divide these two, we get 5. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. That's not what we get. So a negative divided by a negative is going to have to be a -5. For C, we have -25 divided by 5 divided by something is equal to -1. Well, the -25 divided by 5 is -5. If we divide that by something, we get -1. So if we divide the -5 by 5, we get -1. For D, we're given -8 divided by something divided by -2 is equal to -2. Well, if we move over that -2 by adding it, by multiplying it to each side, we're left with -8 divided by something is equal to +4. So -8 divided by what is a +4? This is going to have to be a -2. For 15, we're writing true or false for each. So for A, it says the quotient of two integers is always an integer. No, that's not true. So what that's telling you is an integer is a number that does not have a fraction or a decimal attached to it. It's a positive or negative number with no fraction or decimal. And that's not true because when you divide, let's say, 38 and 5, you're not going to get a whole number or a number that doesn't have a decimal or a fraction. So this is false. B says the quotient of any number and its opposite is always -1. Yes, that one is true. So that's saying something like 6 and -6. So if you divide 6 and -6, you get -1. Next, we are going into squares and square roots. So the square root of a number is you finding a number times itself that equals the number underneath the radical. So there's this thing called a radical. It's the same thing as the square root sign. So this here, this little sign that looks like a long check mark on the top, looks or is the radical sign. It's represented as the square root. So again, you are finding the number times itself. That's the number that equals the number underneath that radical. A perfect square is a number that you can take the square root of. So for example, we have 1, 4, 9, 25, 16, 36, 49, 64, so on. Okay. With these, for 11, we are finding each square. 13 squared is 13 times 13, and that's 169. For B, we have negative 17 squared. So negative 17 times negative 17. If we have a negative times a negative, it's a positive. So that's 17 times 17, which is 289. For C, we have 1/4 squared. So that's just 1/4 times 1/4, which is 1/16. And for D, we have 1.2 squared. So 1.2 times 1.2 is 1.44. 12 says, which numbers are perfect squares? So A, can you take the square root of 1,000? Yes, no, you cannot. So this one is no. For C, you have this 625, so can you take the square root of 625? The square root of 625 is 25, so this one works. For B, we have 400. Can you take the square root of 400? Yes, it's 20, so that one works. And then for D, you have 160. Yes, the square root of 16 is 4, but that 0 does not match up with another 0, so you cannot take the square root of that one. For 13, we're finding the square root of each of these. So for A, we have 324 that we're finding the square root of. 18 times 18 is 324, so that's just 18. For B, we have 1.69. You know that 169, if you find the square root of that, it's 13, but there's a decimal point there, so this is going to be 1.3. For C, we have a negative square root of 900. The square root of 900, you cannot, oh yes, you can do. It's 30. So because that negative is out front, it's just going to be a negative 30. And then for D, you have the square root of 25 over 49. So you're going to take the square root of 25, which is 5. Keep it over the square root of 49, which is 7. So 5 over 7 for this one. For A, in number 14, it says between what two consecutive integers is each square root? So A, we're given the square root of 19. What 19 falls between what two perfect squares? 16 and 25. So that would be 4 and 5. For B, we have a negative square root of 60. 60 falls between what two perfect squares? 49 and 64. So that would be 7 and 8, but there's a negative in front of here. So this is negative 7 and negative 8. For C, we have the square root of 102. So 102 falls between the two perfect squares of 100 and 121. So that would be 10 and 11. D, we have 200. The square root of 200. So if we know that the two perfect squares that are around that are 225 and, hold on one second, 256 is, no, yes, 225, which is 15 squared, and then 169, which is 13 squared, it would be 14 times 14 gives us 196. So that's 14 and 15 that 200 falls between. All right. So for 15, we're solving these. For A, we have the square root of 36 plus the square root of 100. That's 6 plus 10, which is 16. For B, we have the square root of 25, which is 5, plus the square root of 49, which is 7. That gives us 12. For C, we have the negative square root of 169, which is negative 13, plus the square root of 225, which is 15. That's positive 2. Different signs. Keep the sign in front of the larger number, which is positive. Subtract the 2. For D, we have 50 squared divided by 5 squared. The 50 squared gives us 2,500. If we do that divided by the 5 squared, that's 25. So this is 100. For your test review, for number 1, we have which number is the greatest. So we first have 1 over 10, which is 0.1. Negative 2.2, well, with all of the rest of these numbers, they're all negatives. So the first one there would have to be your greatest. For 2, it asks which comparison is not true. F says the absolute value of negative 9 is greater than the absolute value of negative 2. That's 9 is greater than 2. That's true. For G, we have the absolute value of 0.8, which is 0.8 is equal to the absolute value of negative 0.8. That's 0.8. That's also true. For H, we have negative 11. The absolute value of negative 11 is less than the absolute value of negative 7. That says 11 is less than 7, which is not true. So H is our answer. 3 says, what operation is shown on the number line? So we're going to start at negative 5, and we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that's negative 5 plus 11, which is D. 4, we're given negative times negative 8 is equal to what? A negative times a negative is a positive, so that's F. For 5, it says negative 12 minus negative 7 is equal to what? So negative 12 plus 7. Two signs that are opposite. We're going to subtract these and keep the sign in front of the 12, which is going to give us negative 5. For 5, we have 2/3 minus negative 1/3, which is going to be a positive. So 2/3 plus 1/3 is 3/3, that's 1, times negative 1/2 plus negative 1/2, which is negative 2 halves, which is negative 1. A positive times a negative is a negative, so that's just negative 1. For 16, we're finding each value. For A, we have negative 1 to the 10th power, which is going to be positive 1. B, we have negative 2 to the 7th power. That power is odd, so we're going to have a negative. And 2 times itself 7 times. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32, times 2 is 64, times 2 is 128. So negative 128. For C, we have negative 3 to the 5th power. The exponent is odd, so we're going to have a negative. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Times negative 3 is negative 27. Times negative 3 is positive 81. Positive 81 times a negative 3 is 243. So negative 243. For 6, if we divide 9 and negative 1/3, this is going to be 9 over 1 times negative 3 over 1. So that's just negative 27. So J. 7 asks, which group of integers is in order from least to greatest? So we have, for A, negative 2, negative 4, that's not least to greatest. B is negative 8, negative 4, negative 2, 0, 3. That's our answer. 8 says, which group of numbers are all perfect squares? F says 1, 16, 27. 27 is not a perfect square. G says 4, 39, 64. 39 is not a perfect square. H is 9, 49, and 81. Yes. For J, your 10 is not a perfect square. 9 says between which two integers is a negative square root of 72? Well, if we had the negative square root of 64 and the negative square root of 81, the negative square root of 72 falls between it, so that's going to be 8, negative 8, and negative 9. So that's A. 11 says find all values of n that make the following statement true. The absolute value of something is equal to 23. So that's either the positive 23 or the negative 23. And then again, you can write this as plus or minus 23. It's the same thing. 12 says from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., the outdoor temperature went from 12 degrees Fahrenheit to negative 3 degrees Fahrenheit. What was the average change in temperature per hour? So from 4 to 9, you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 5 hours. So you're going to divide something by 5. It went from 12 to negative 3. Well, going from 12 to negative 3, that's a difference. It's going down of 15. So it's negative 15 divided by 5, which gives us negative 3 degrees per hour. For 13, it says use the number line, name the point for each rational number. For A, we have negative 2.6. Well, negative 2.6 is R. For B, we have 3 4/5, which is W. C is negative 4 1/2, so that's P. And D is negative 0.75, which is T. For your practice from the first section, which is that multiplication with signed numbers, it says which product is positive. A, we have a negative times a negative times a negative. That's going to give us a negative, so that's not right. C, we have a positive times a negative times a positive. One odd positive, nope. Or sorry, one odd negatives, so no. C, we have negative 8 times 4 times negative 9. A negative times a negative is a positive. B asks us to find the product of negative 7 times negative 8. A negative times a negative is a positive, and 7 times 8 is 56. 13 says Alicia drank 8 ounces of orange juice from a large container each morning for the past 4 days. Which expression represents how much more juice was in the container 4 days ago? So we would have a negative 8 times a negative 4, which would be C. For number 4, it says to multiply 10 times negative 1 3/5. So this is the same thing as 10 over 1 times negative 1, 1 times 5 is 5 plus 3 is negative 8 over 5. So the 10 becomes a 2, 5 becomes a 1. So 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. For 5, we are multiplying negative 2.4 times negative 1.3. A negative times a negative is a positive. So 2.4 times 1.3, 4 times 3 is 12. Carry the 1. 3 times 2 plus 1 is 7. Moving over to the 1, add your 0. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. Add these. So 2, 7, and 4 is 11. And then 3. You have 1 decimal place in each of these numbers, so your answer should have 2. So this is going to be 3.12. And again, it stays positive because a negative times a negative is a positive. For 6, we're finding the missing number of negative 9 times something is 126. So first think a negative times what is a positive? A negative. So our answer is going to be negative. And then divide the 2. 126 divided by 9 gives us 14. So that missing number is negative 14. For 7, we're multiplying negative 5 times negative 7 times negative 6. Well, negative 5 times negative 6 is positive 30. Times a negative 7 is a negative 210. 8 asks us which product is negative. F, we have a negative 4 times a negative 4. That's a positive 4 times positive times a positive. That's going to be positive, so that's not right. For G, we have an odd number of negatives, so these two would become positive, and your answer would be negative, so G would be negative. H, you would have 2 positives here, and then 2 here. And then J, a negative times a negative is a positive. For 9, it says n times negative 7 is equal to negative 19. Find the value of n. Well, a negative divided by a negative, a negative times a negative is a positive, so we know that n is not negative. So we're just going to divide these two. 119 divided by 7 is 17, so n is just 17. For 10, it says find the missing number. -6 times something is equal to 12 times -4. Well, we know that these are going to be positives. So we know that 12 times -4 is -48. So -6 times something is equal to -48. It's going to be a +8. For our next section, we have -60 divided by -5. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. 5 goes into 60 12 times. 2 asks which quotient is equal to 1. For F, we have a -14 divided by a +14. That's equal to -1, so that's not right. G, same thing. That's going to be -1. H is 0. And then J, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, and those two numbers are the same. 3 says a climber descends 102 meters in 3 hours. So that's -102 in 3 hours. All right. On average, how much did the climber's elevation change each hour? So we're just dividing these two. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. 3 goes into 10 3 times with 1 left over. 3 goes into 12 4 times. So -34 meters per hour. For 4, we have to find the missing number. We have -24 divided by something is -8. So with this, 24 divided by what is 8? That's 3. We have a negative and a negative, so that's just going to be a +3. For 6, it says which quotient is positive. F, we would get a -1. G, we would get a +1. So G would be positive. For 7, it says which quotient is negative. So A, we have 2 negatives in there, so that would be positive. Same thing with B. With C, we only have 1, so that would be our negative. For 8, we have -2 minus 6, which is -8, divided by -4. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 9 says, when the sum of -1 and -5 is divided by 2, the quotient is. Well, in order to write this, you'd have -1 plus -5 divided by 2. So a -1 divided by a -5, or sorry, a -1 plus -5 is -6, divided by 2 gives us -3. For 10, we have 369 divided by -9 times 5. Well, -9 times 5 is -45, so this is 369 divided by -45. A positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 369 divided by 45 is 8.2. So -8.2 is our answer for that one. Oops, I missed 5. So 5 says find the missing number. Something divided by -9 is 18. So we know that we're getting a positive answer, so our answer is going to have to be negative because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And then we just multiply the 18 and the 9, and we get a -162 for that missing number. For the next practice, it says which number is not a perfect square for number 1. 49 is, 81 is, C, however, is not. You cannot take the square root of 110. 2 says what is the square of 16? That's 16 times 16. Be careful with these. The square root would be what times itself is 16. This is just asking you to square 16, so that would be 256. 3 says to find 4/9 squared, so that's 4/9 times 4/9. 4 times 4 is 16. 9 times 9 is 81, so that's 16 over 81. For 4, we're finding -9 squared, so that's +81. 5 asks which number is irrational. Irrational means that you cannot get a perfect square when you take the square root of these. So C is irrational because you cannot find the square root of 90. C asks to find the negative square root of 225. That's negative 15. 7 says between which two consecutive integers is the square root of 75? Well, we would have the square root of 69 and the square root of 81, so that would be 8 and 9. For 8, it says which statement is false? F says the square root of 2 plus the square root of 4 is 3. That is false. You can't take the square root of 2, so it wouldn't be 1. 9 says to solve 16 squared divided by the square root of 64. Well, 16 squared is 256. Divided by the square root of 64, that's 8. So 256 divided by 8 is 32. 10 says which statement is always true? F says the square of a number is greater than the number. The square of any number is greater than the number. That's always true. Actually, no. 1 squared is not greater than 1. So that one is not always true. G says the square of a number is non-negative. That's true, always. Anytime you have a number and you're squaring it, your answer is always going to be positive. So that one is your answer for this. H says the square root of a negative number is negative. That's not true because you cannot take the square root of a negative number. And J says perfect squares have exactly 1 square root, and that's not true because it's the negative as well. When you're taking the square root of a number, you would represent all numbers, all possible numbers that could make that statement true. Because think about it. If you had the square root of 4, if you did 2 squared, that's 4. But if you did negative 2 squared, that's also 4. So your perfect squares don't only have 1 square root, or your square roots don't have exactly 1 answer.